gave you a chance.
Sorry.
So I kind of like it that way.
You bring it up for everybody?
In the,
Hey, young man, Roger, get a hat like yours.
Roger.
I can help you out. I'll sell you. I can get you one, but I don't know what they are. I'll find out.
Okay, where we left off was, and I wanted to make a distinction here. It was Lincoln, I think Lincoln said it best. We're not interested in overthrowing the Constitution, but the men who pervert it. I like the Constitution a lot, the federal Constitution and the state Constitution, because they are, in Colorado, that is the supreme law in Colorado, as long as it's not repugnant to the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Also, the United States Constitution, the federal government, that's the supreme law of the land as long as it's not repugnant to the principles. So we have a frame of reference from which to work. We're not just shooting in the dark, starting over again. So when I talk about throwing off government, I'm operating from the premise that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and is still in full force and effect. And strategy-wise, we can use the Constitution to indict individuals within the government that are acting contrary to it, but how would we know if we don't have a tape measure? How do we know what 12 inches is? So we got to start with the Constitution to discern what is reasonable, just, fair, honest law, and compare the conduct of what the government's up to that. Now, Romans 13, and the gentleman came up and I appreciated it, wants to make the distinction that when the government is operating from a just, honorable, righteous, fair, true place, then every soul is subject to that authority because everything is in alignment with true authority. But when a government is being used as an instrumentality to throw off the people, then the government itself has been commandeered as being used as a weapon against the people. So the people, the power is again revested. So this, in the day that Paul wrote this, they didn't have a constitution. They didn't have the Magna Carta. They didn't have the evolution of law that evolved to the place where it was, where the law recognizes that the people themselves are the source of sovereignty. And that the hierarchy of command is the creator, the people, the Constitution, the creator, the people, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the government as agents and servants of the people. When this has become upside down, where God is now on the bottom with truth and justice and fairness and intellectual conversation of reason and logic, when all of that is considered unreasonable, no, it's time to turn the world upside down. And if you look through Scripture, you'll find out that's why they killed Jesus. And that's why his apostles were being hunted down, because they were turning the world upside down. In other words, they were turning it right side up. So when he said, my kingdom's not of this world, he was coming from the place, my kingdom's about truth. And that's what America's government is supposed to be, about truth. When they cease to become about truth, they cease to become subject to the higher powers, because truth is the highest power. Roger, you're trying to get on and say something.
Can you repeat that hierarchy of command, creator?
Well, the hierarchy of command is the creator.
Next.
The people, the Declaration of Independence, the constitutions, and the government. But that structure has been completely inverted. I wrote a letter to the editor. I don't know if you got a chance to read it. The county of Gunnison wants to build a $13 million courthouse. Excuse me?
Whoa.
Excuse me? They want to increase the county budget by 27% so they can have their courthouse. Excuse me? Wrong. You know, they throw the fishing line out there and they keep reeling in all this taxes until one day they reel in a pitchfork. And that's where we are. It's time to pull the pitchforks out. No, we're done with this attitude where the government thinks that we're a pool of human resources.
Right.
And that's exactly how the government looks at us when we're driving down the highway, and these state patrolmen, they're revenue hunters,
Right.
okay? They're trolls on the highway doing the patrol thing, and the people are being herded, and you know, when does it stop? How far do they have to go before the people finally say, okay, enough? You know, and it shouldn't have to go to the point of pitchforks.
Getting back to that Romans 13.
Yes, sir.
Don't those people, those religious establishments that say, yeah, we got to obey, don't they realize that the government is trying to take God and throw him away?
Well, they do, and I'm going out on a limb to say this, but I hold the opinion, subject to change, and I always should say this caveat: I reserve the right to be wrong and change my mind with further research. Okay, but it appears to me that when the churches took the corporate status and they incorporated under the state, all corporations are creatures of the state. So when the churches incorporate, they bring the church under the state. Then they go to the IRS and they petition the IRS for an exemption that they already had before they incorporated. So the churches, who are an autonomous entity, which means they are sovereign in another jurisdiction, in an ecclesiastical sense, they are sovereign. What was the principal sanctuary? Remember the old movies, you know, the criminal would run into a church and give sanctuary. The civil authorities couldn't go in there. That's because the church is sovereign. That's what sanctuary was all about. When the churches came over here and incorporated, they gave up that sovereignty by becoming a creature of the state, because all corporations are creatures of the state. Then they applied to the tax 501c3 to become a tax-exempt corporation, and now they're bound and gagged because they might lose their status.
Right.
That happened through Johnson.
So the churches are
But they
compromising with the state.
They should realize that they're losing their status because of all these things that, you know, no Christmas carols at Christmas time. You got, for every Christmas carol you're going to sing, you better sing Frosty the Snowman.
As long as this church chooses to be a creature of the state has the right to dictate to the church what they can teach from the pulpit. Ouch.
Thank you.
Yes, sir?
Yeah, that linkage between the state and the churches leads the churches now to where, instead of saying, let every soul, including the rulers, be subject to the higher powers, which are God, they're now saying, let every soul, all of you little peons, be subject to the higher powers government.
And so let's go a little bit further with that statement. The word higher powers in that particular scripture is, I know this. Hupereko. Exousia hupereko is the actual Greek translation. And it literally means superpower, the potentate, the highest authority. It literally means the Creator's power. Let every soul be subject to the Creator's power, the supreme ruler of the universe. This is where Colorado started their constitution. Let we, the people of Colorado, with profound reverence to the supreme ruler of the universe. Most of the 50 states have preambles that start out by acknowledging the Creator, our Father, as having the ultimate authority and jurisdiction, and recognizing from there that the people are vested and entrusted with that power on earth to create governments. So that's, again, the hierarchy of control, the hierarchy of power is from the higher power, which of course would be consistent with Romans 13 if we would look at it as a power that is not of this world, as a kingdom that is not of this world. And God is not, because it would look like the rest of them. So that getting back to jurisdiction, the state legislatures were intended to be separate. This is not intended to be a national system called the United States of America. From the beginning, this was supposed to be a system, a confederation. a federation of states, each one retaining their sovereignty and their individuality and their independence. And they came together. It was really no different than the United Nations is today. When the United States joins the United Nations, they don't lose their sovereignty. They're a member state to the United Nations. The United States was set up just like that. The United States is supposed to be merely an agent representing the 50 states who are sovereign, and they retain their sovereignty, but they've delegated a certain amount of their power to the federal government to take care of international affairs and to coin money, and there's 17 enumerated powers, and those are the powers that the federal government's supposed to be operating. In the process of operating within those powers, the state legislatures were supposed to guard and closely watch the operations of the government. And the state legislatures were intended to be the guardians of the people's liberty. So when you elect one of your state representatives into that office, they need to understand that they have more power than the United States government. See, we see this, you know, we elect someone into office and we elect them into aristocracy. And a lot of these people, I'm not going to, you know, accuse them all, just the politicians of the group, the statesmen, of course, I'm not going to accuse them. But the politicians see it as an opportunity in their career to advance their career and move up to the top. And they see the President of the United States as the top. And so he's viewed already as a supreme dictator. And this is why I believe a lot of the reasons why there's, you know, any talk of impeachment is politically incorrect anymore. And anybody that would talk about impeachment is considered a radical. No, the idea of impeachment is to keep that guy that's holding that office. Remember, the office is what we should revere, not the man in the office. We should revere the office of president for what it is. And just because a man goes into that office and takes on the mantle of the president doesn't mean that he is immune. He can act outside the scope of his jurisdiction, and if he does, he's a criminal. Like when he orders drone strikes on American citizens, he's a criminal. And that needs to be addressed the same way that the King George was addressed. He exercised power outside of his jurisdiction, and how did he know that? He knew that because the Magna Carta and other constitutions that were written for the King of England, or powers for the King of England, indicted him. Just like the Constitution today indicts the federal or the state government representatives when they exercise power outside the scope of that document. In a single republic, all of the power is surrendered by the people. It's submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations are guarded against by a division of government into distinct and separate departments. The idea is to create the separation of powers, executive, legislative, judicial. Each one of those departments has jurisdiction within all of the powers that they operate from. And that separation of power is to keep deliberately any one branch from usurping the power of another branch. The power surrendered by the people is divided between two distinct governments. Again, state and federal. And then the portion allotted to each subdivided against the distinct and separate departments. So once the federal government was created, it's broken down, executive, legislative, judicial as well. Hence, a double security rises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other at the same time that each will be controlled by itself. And see here, a double security arises to the rights of the people. It was never intended for the state government to crawl into bed with the federal government, and the churches crawl into bed with the state government, and then the state government and the church and now we create a Federal Reserve System that was not authorized by the Constitution, and all of these begin to merge together to form one centralized power. This is completely the direction that the Founding Fathers were intending to break down. Local control, local jurisdiction, local power, and as you get closer to the top, the less power they have. Or I should say not less, but different. Like the federal government was given the power to coin money. It was given, and regulate the value thereof, it was given the power to talk internationally with other countries. You know, the states didn't want to mess with that, so they delegated that to the federal government. That's proper jurisdiction. And that would be outside the jurisdiction of the state. Yes, sir.
The Supreme Court is about to take on a ruling that is already ruled on. And my mind is spinning, but you're coming at that with jurisdiction. And in these sections here, what happens when somebody retakes or tries to revamp their own jurisdiction?
They can't. Okay.
But they are.
But let's come at it from they can't. And if they are, that's usurpation. Let's call it what it is. If they're overstepping the boundaries of their power, that is the very definition of usurpation. When a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object. It doesn't say if, should, maybe, one day, it might happen. It says, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce the people under absolute despotism. The problem with power is that it corrupts. The Founding Fathers knew that. They wrote those principles into that document, and I like to call it a message in a bottle. And they sent it forward into time so that we would not forget. And it's enshrined in, like I said, fundamental American jurisprudence. It is a usurpation. So let's not say they can. They can't. The powers of government of this state are divided into three distinct departments: legislative, executive, and judicial. This separation of powers, called the separation of powers doctrine, no one person or collection of persons charged with the exercise of powers properly belonging to one of these departments shall exercise any power properly belonging to either of the others, except as in this Constitution expressly directed or permitted. Legislative jurisdiction, judicial jurisdiction, executive jurisdiction. Cops, administrative agencies, BLM, Forest Service, those are all executive agencies that are exercising executive jurisdiction in the areas that was delegated to them by Congress. Okay? The judges, the courts, they exercise judicial jurisdiction when the facts and the law provide that a charge in a criminal case would go before the court. If I have a disagreement with one of you, I can go into court and invoke a civil jurisdiction within the court. The court will settle the difference. Now, in Colorado, the legislative power of the state shall be vested in the General Assembly, consisting of both the Senate and House of Representatives. Jurisdiction again. Article 5, legislative department. Now, here is the best evidence to show you Article 1 of the federal Constitution, all legislative powers herein granted. All legislative powers herein granted. And remember, if you juxtapose this to the 10th, it says the powers not delegated shall be reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So, again, the federal government being very limited in its power. The federal government has dramatically expanded over the past 2 centuries, but it still must show that a constitutional grant of power authorizes each of its actions. Affordable health care. This is just last year. John Roberts, in his decision, he made this statement. In his decision, I'm quoting John Roberts. They recognize this concept. They know this principle. The lawyers know it, the judges know it, the lawmakers know it, they all know it. And John Roberts had to squirm to get around it when he validated the Affordable Health Care Act by turning it into a tax, which we were assured that it was not. But it got turned into a tax, and that was the only way it could have been implemented, because it was not constitutional otherwise, because the federal government does not have any direct authority over individuals, and that's why the individual mandate failed. Again, 10th Amendment, reserving power, we've done that. We've done that. I've shown you that. Oh, let's go into jurisdiction. Okay, so, and this is Title III of the Colorado Revised Statutes. And in this book,